Welcome to the presentation. The presentation is about sexual orientation, homosexuality, prepared by Yukesh Rai. As you can see in the picture, there is the symbol of LGBTI community, also known as rainbow flag. So before we start talking and discussing about sexual orientation or homosexuality, one must understand the very meaning of gender and sex. The meaning of word, gender, and sex is completely different. Albeit of difference in meaning, people tend to perceive it as a synonym word. So we need to question what is gender, what is sex, what is gender role, and where is confusion. To understand gender in a very simple terms, gender is not inherently nor solely connected to one's physical anatomy, which means your body part doesn't identify you as a certain gender. Sex. Sex can be referred as biological gender, which includes physical attributes such as external genitalia, sex chromosome, sex hormones, and internal reproductive structure. So in simple terms, we can understand sex as definition based definition or identification based totally upon our biological and physical looks, such as our reproductive system. Gender role and confusion. Our society only recognizes male and female sex as gender based on biological reproductive system, and based on these binary terms, roles are issued and taught since childhood. To better understand this, for example, dolls are bought for girls in order to develop femininity in them, and toys such as cars, guns, etc. are bought for boys in order to develop masculinity in them. This concludes us that people identifying themselves as homosexual or LGBTI are left unrecognized by the society, leaving them with no role in the society. So this creates a confusion for people who identify themselves as homosexual or LGBTI or transgender, because they got no role to fill in the society, because the society ignores them and their identity. So we must understand, in order to understand sexual orientation, homosexuality, gender identity, LGBTI, transgender, intersex, homophobia, and transphobia, we must understand definition of those words. By understanding the definition of those words, we can interrelate and see the interrelation relationship of those words. Sexual orientation. Sexual orientation can be defined in simple terms as a person's physical and emotional attraction and of romance towards other people. Homosexuality. Homosexuality is an act of being attracted or being in a relationship which is of physical, emotional, mental, and social towards the same-sex people rather than individual of opposite sex. So, to understand homosexuality in pretty simple terms, we can understand as the quite opposite of heterosexual. Gender identity, the perception, experience, sense, and feeling of one's own gender is known as gender identity. Biological sex assigned to the people at birth cannot address the gender identity for transgender people. So, gender identity is not totally based on the reproductive system or anatomic or physical appearance, but rather it's like the perception, experience, sense, and feelings of one's own gender. LGBTI. LGBTI stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. The people who form relationship and those who exhibit non-binary identities such as Hijra, Meti, Lala, Saxana, Kawaii, etc. are known as LGBT. Transgender. Transgender is referred as an umbrella term used to describe a wide range of identities, including transsexual people, cross-dresser, people who identify themselves as third gender, and others whose appearances and characteristics are perceived as gender atypical. In simple terms, people who do not consider themselves as heterosexual and consider themselves as homosexual are known as transgender. Intersex. A person who is born with sexual anatomy, reproductive organs, and or chromosome patterns that do not fit the typical definition of male or female is known as intersex. Homophobia. Homophobia is an irrational fear of hatred or aversion towards lesbian, gay, or bisexual people. Transphobia. Transphobia is an irrational fear, hatred, or aversion towards transgender people. So, after knowing the definition of those words, there is a question that arises within us that what causes people to be homosexual or LGBT? And there's only one answer, and it's the fact that there is no any cause that makes people homosexual or LGBTI, because a person's sexual orientation or gender identity cannot be changed nor have a cause and is a disease, but it is entirely stigmatization of LGBT people, because if we do that, it's entirely stigmatization of LGBT people, because we got no rights to change them, to change their gender identity or force upon them. If we do that, it's entirely stigmatization of LGBT people. Factors affecting homosexual or LGBTI community. There are some factors that I'm gonna mention in this presentation in brief. Depression. Depression is the most common factors affecting every single people who identifies themselves as homosexual, LGBTI, and transgender. Mental health. The treatment given by society, peers, and others by making them feel alienated in a social circle degrades their mental health, resulting change in their behavior, mood, relationship, appetite, and sleep patterns, coping, excessive use of alcohol and drugs, etc. As you can see in the picture, there are 9 types of common factors affecting homosexual people and LGBTI community. Number 1 is verbal abuse. Number 2 is physical abuse. Number 3 is bullying. Number 4 is HIV. Number 5 is discrimination. Number 6 is it's anxiety. Number 7 is panic disorder. Number 8 is social exclusion. And number 9 is physical threats. So these are also the factors that affects homosexual and LGBTI community, but these are also the factors that hinders them from coming out. So to understand coming out in a very simple way, coming out can be understood by us in simple terms. In simple terms, coming out is the process of identifying, accepting one's own sexual identity and sexual orientation and announcing to public with pride and dignity. There are 4 stages of coming out. Number 1, recognition and acceptance of own sexual orientation. Number 2, approaching LGBTI community members first before going public. Number 3, approaching mothers first, then any other family members. Number 4, taking part in parades that celebrates sexual diversity. So the most important note here is it's an individual choice of coming out or staying in. As you can see in the picture, there is a parade of sexual diversity. History of homosexuality rights in the US in brief. In 1950, lesbian and gay men organized the first sustainable LGBT movement organization that sought to create and nurture a coherent and collective, albeit largely assimilationist political identity. Political identity. In 1970, the first gay pride marches were held to multiple cities across the United States on the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots, including San Francisco and Los Angeles. In June 25, 1978, in San Francisco, the rainbow flag is first flown during the Gay Freedom Parade. The flag becomes a symbol of gay and lesbian pride. In June 5, 1981, AIDS epidemic begins. The US Center for Disease Control reported the first case of a rare lung disease, which would be named AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, the following year. In December 1, 1988, the World Health Organization declared December 1 as the first World AIDS Day. In 1993, the US Congress passed and President Bill Clinton signed Don't Ask, Don't Tell that allowed gay and lesbian people to serve in the military. In 2003, Kansas law criminalizing gay or lesbian sex was unconstitutional, declaring the importance of constitutional liberty and privacy consistent with the Due Process clause of the 14th Amendment. Thank you.